How's it going, everybody? My name is Antonio, and I have Stephen Swatton on the barbecue today, and I'm told he is to be grilled to at least well done. So we'll see how it goes for him. Who's not going to be going too well for, though, today is people looking for financial advice, as this conversation will not include any of that. This is going to be just a talk, a general and impersonal talk between two guys on the internet. And so that means that it will include a lot of forward-looking statements as well as hopes and dreams of a brighter future, which means that you should double and triple check everything mentioned herein by using the only website on the internet that hasn't been updated since the time that the dinosaurs were still around, aka setter.com, because the minimum risk related to anything and everything mentioned in this conversation is 100% loss of capital. That all said, Steve here is the CEO and director of CopperCorp Resources, which is at the time of recording of this video, at least $8.5 million Canadian exploration company with quite a lot of cash on the balance sheet, but also quite the large land package totaling over 1,600 kilometers in Tasmania. Tasmania, by the way, is an island. It's some 250-ish kilometers to the south of Australia, of the Australian mainland. It's the largest project that the company has is called the AMC project, and its primary focus right now is copper, if the name wasn't indicative enough. And they're hoping for an IOCG type deposit, which means that there's potential for gold and iron in there as well. Now, CopperCorp also has another project where they're hoping for the same style of mineralization. This one is closer to the other IOCG deposit on the island. Mount Lyle, I believe it's pronounced. Lyle. Okay. Only this project is a bit smaller, but it's not small by any means. It spans over 360 square kilometers. This one is called the Skyline project, and the main focus, again, copper exploration. That's not it, though. CopperCorp was just awarded an exploration license this week for one more project. This one is thought to be prospective primarily for rare earth elements, and it's also not small, though smaller than the previous one. This one spans over 170 square kilometers. Again, in terms of cash, company has over $6 million or about $6 million in cash, and an interesting plan for the next couple of years that I hope to learn more about in this interview. So let me shut up now and give the word to you, Steve. Thank you for investing your time with me today.
Oh, thanks very much. Fire away. Get me roasted.
What did I miss in the overview before I start the barbecue here?
No, not much at all, really. I mean, except for the fact that we're awaiting results from the Skyline property at the moment as we speak here. I mean, we're a bit surprised to get the nod on the Razorback before we got the results back, but so it happened in a little bit reverse what we're expecting. But yeah, this Razorback, just so that you know, was something that came about as a result of us actually looking for more copper gold, like Mount Lyle. But in the last 9 months, we applied for this project about 9 months ago. And as a result of that, of course, the world has changed its opinion on the value of rare earths, particularly the heavier rare earths. So that's about it. Yeah. No, but you did a good intro. Yeah.
Okay, good stuff. All things that we'll be talking about, by the way, throughout the conversation. And the pleasure is all mine to host you, obviously. And I'm looking forward to this because I like beaten down stocks, and yours definitely is amongst those. If I ever saw one, you beam down 80% off the highs. So I find it an interesting situation, and I want to kick it off sort of at a different spot though. You're an Englishman, if I'm getting the accent correct, but you're living in Vancouver and you're looking for copper on an island close to Australia. So I guess truly a Renaissance man there, if I may add. But
you want to know why?
I want to know how actually. I guess how is a good question too.
Yeah, I mean, previously I was with the Discovery Group looking at a project in California, and they've actually made a discovery down there now. And I happily handed it on to a guy who's North American. It's a little more easier for North Americans to be working down in parts of the US with the visa situation and everything else. But the main reason is that when I was in one of my previous roles, I was head of business development for BHP Billiton, and I was based in Singapore, and I spent a lot of time in Melbourne as well. So I got a very good insight into the in the inner circles of how these bigger companies operate. I started my career with Rio Tinto, and then kind of like in the latter years, I was working with BHP. And my remit, if you like, was to find more copper. That was the main thing that I was looking for. So I spent a lot of time in the DRC, spent a lot of time in what I'd say some funky countries of the world. And it was a very difficult situation for us because we had this risk reward profile, and also health and safety matters were extremely important. There was a whole bunch of competing, if you like, situations that it came down to the fact that we decided we'd go and do more exploration around what we already had, which was in Chile and Peru, and particularly Chile. And we downsized the whole exploration department whilst I was there from 220 people down to about 50. And because we just couldn't really get our head around going to some of the countries where, and I won't go into them too much, but the countries where we thought there was the most potential. Now, Tasmania is an interesting island. I mean, we already knew about it. It's quite a famous island in geological circles, Antonio, because of the Renaissance tin mine, the Rosebery. And it also has Savage River, which is a mid-size, intrusive, Karuna style, if you like, magnetite body. And Doug Kerwin, who is a colleague of mine, recognized that it probably had some IOCG potential as well, because there's a bunch of copper showings around it. So I put two and two together and I said, okay, these bigger companies, they like to be in safe jurisdictions. They want a large land package so that, you know, traditionally the first hole you're going to drill is not going to be where the asset really is. It's usually somewhere else. And, you know, there's but you want to have enough ground that you have a proper crack at a very large exploration program. And some of our budgets, as you could imagine, at BHP were huge, right? They dwarfed anybody else by 3 or 4 times any of the juniors. And that's what they kind of like to get their teeth into. So when I was discussing coming over with Craig Roberts, who's another director of ours, he's from Newfound Gold fame, if you like. It was a situation that I thought, well, this is kind of interesting, because we never gave, in the BHP days, Tasmania a second look, because it was considered a little bit too green. And this was something that we thought we'd never have something large enough, and it was also a little green. But I can tell you from my experience down there now that it's a very pro-mining state. The largest GDP is generated from the mining, the mining, different mines that are in the area. And within 30 to 40 kilometers of where we are, there's 6 operating mines. It's something I didn't realize. I mean, it's a lot of people, because whenever you think of Tasmania, a lot of people think of going on holiday to fantastic national parks, and there are. But there's this one small corner of Tasmania, which is basically very much mining, and everybody, either directly or indirectly, is employed in the mining industry. So it's favorable in terms of that. And it's also relatively unexplored, because the western side of Tasmania is pretty wild. I mean, its next stop is Antarctica. So you can imagine the vegetation is pretty intense. On the eastern side, it's more vineyards and dairy farms. But on the western side, where the original pioneers did their exploration, there are, I'm not kidding you, thousands of showings of the old timers in the 1800s have been there. But there's been some exploration, obviously, since then, but not to the same extent as it would be, say, for example, in Nevada or Arizona or the mainland Australia, for example. So therein it lies, there's a large area, like we've got 110 kilometers with the AMC, 110 kilometers of strike. And it's been only cursory looked at in the past. And yet Savage River, which is 500 million tons of magnetite material, has all of these copper showings that nobody since, I would say, in the 1930s has really looked at. So we took the approach, let's just take everything we can, and it's relatively cheap to take out these licenses. You have to put a program on it that with the government, you have to spend a certain amount of money, but it's not onerous like it is in Finland or one of these European countries that I worked on in the past. So with that in mind, we needed a central project. So we went into Alpine, which has been drilled in the past by a company called Stella. And we're starting from a pretty small beginnings with this one location, but we have over 25 different locations that we'd like to explore. Yes, our budget at the moment doesn't extend to be able to do everything that we need to do. But the second project we had, Skyline, we just drilled, we came out with the IPO at 10 million. We still got 6 million in the bank, and we've done two drilling programs and several exploration programs. So I think we're in a pretty good position now. I took the approach early on when we saw the copper, because if you look at the copper price and our share price, there's a strong correlation between the copper price going down and our share price really going south as well. I took the approach that we weren't going to go aggressively and drill with 3 drills on site. We decided to scale back a little bit and spend a bit more, so kind of thinking about the exploration for the whole area. And I think I'm trying to design this that if there's an asset which we could take ourselves and develop ourselves, that's one thing. But I think the whole land package would be of interest to some of these larger companies, simply because it's, a safe jurisdiction. Geological potential is definitely there, IOCGs. Now with this rare earths that we have at Razorback, it's good. There are ports, there are industrial ports, and there's a skilled workforce. So it's kind of got all the boxes within the
Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt here. I do want to talk about Tasmania more in depth in a second, but before because I'm going to forget this question, it's important. You just mentioned your drilling and the packages being rather large. I saw that you spent about $1 million in the first quarter of the year. What is sort of the breakdown of what that money has bought you? Why I'm asking is mostly because of the discrepancy between, you're in Vancouver, this is Tasmania, you're an Englishman. So, between travel and marketing and all that, what are you mostly spending money on right now?
Oh, drilling. I've been down 3 or 4 times myself, but that's not a huge expense. The main expense is on the drilling and on the ground and assay samples and basically getting things set up, if you like. I mean, we have what amounts to an aircraft hangar down there with, core boxes, coming out of the gunnels there. We have 3 geologists. There was a marketing program at the start, but that was in the heady days when the copper prices were getting high, and there was a little bit of feeling from one of the directors in particular that we should go kind of like on a pretty aggressive marketing, but we kind of nixed that when we realized the way it was going. So yeah,
that was 2021. I saw that you spent quite a lot of money on 2021 on marketing, but then it decreased significantly in 2022. Maybe you can talk to me about that too. What's the plan of the marketing spend in 2023? I guess
2023 it's going to be somewhat limited to some digital marketing and some key conferences that I would like to go to and key investors that I'm actually trying to target right now, because literally the type of approach that we're taking on right now is one where I think it would appeal to a major or a mid-sized company. So I'm targeting a lot of my marketing towards finding maybe a partner, one of these sized companies, to come in and maybe take a key position within the company. So our marketing in terms of on the retail side is going to be way reduced from where it was before.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
if we're talking about marketing to drilling ratios and stuff like that, you're still, most of the money you're still going to go in the ground.
Yeah, 90% or more. I mean, our overheads are very low. I mean, we got 4 geologists down in Tasmania, got myself, and I think you met Alex, the IR corporate development guy, and that's it. I mean, our burn rate per month is less than 100,000 if standing still.
Okay, that's interesting, and that's where you're going to keep it this year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's interesting.
It's going to be results driven, and if the results are particularly spectacular, particularly now that with this rare earth situation, it's added a different dimension to the company. I mean, it was something that we never anticipated going, and we knew they were there. But that's not the reason we went into Razorback. But that might actually change our focus of our marketing as well, because I see that some strong revaluations of companies that have significant rares, particularly in Australia as well.
It's interesting. You should see it's going to be based on results, because I saw that your personal compensation in 2021 was with a bonus in it, and then when I looked at the management circular in 2022, there was no bonus, but your total comp sort of went up. So I was just thinking, how do you determine G&A spend including management, and how you're going to be determining that going forward?
Um, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, we have to be very prudent with our funds. I mean, there is no ban. I mean, the way this business works, Antonio, as you know, is that um, if the markets are not doing very well, you don't really get bonuses.
Yeah.
Um, that's the way it is. I mean, it could be ridiculous that the bonus could be attributed to some sort of drilling success, but the reality is that the company doesn't really have sufficient funds to be able to pay it. It doesn't really happen, in my opinion. And the companies I've worked with, that's the way it really appears. So I'm not quite sure how to answer your question directly, but look, we're going to keep an eye on the purse strings. There is no massive overheads. I mean, I don't see it's going to be any change from what you see right now.
Okay. What about 100 a month? Okay, 1.2 a year. No, makes sense. It makes sense. I saw that one of your insiders with the last news update, if I'm not mistaken, he's actually the person who owned the largest position in the company. He owned, let me just see, I'm forgetting his name. I'm sorry. I think it was
Aaron K.
Exactly, Aaron K. He owns about 12% of the company, and he left the company. What's the situation with him?
Yeah, he's comes from a marketing background, and also he used to be an ex-professional soccer player. I think he's dabbled in this side of the industry and has had some success as well, but decided that he would like to really focus on his other career, which is more within the, if you like, professional sports side.
Oh.
And it was a personal decision that he made. He's still a strong supporter of ours, but he realized that, and in emails to me, that he's not quite sure what he can really add other than the marketing angle to it, because we're now getting very much technically. If you see some of our news releases, they're extremely technical. We have a very technical team, and he's not quite sure, with the market being the way that it is right now, what he can actually really contribute. And so he's sitting there in the wings. He's a reporting issuer. He's more than 10%, but he's there to support us, but he doesn't know how to deliver any value from his input.
Good point. No, I like that. Good point. Good point. But I mean, it's not like he's selling out, moving on. He's keeping his shares.
Okay. No, he's absolutely not. And obviously, because he's a reporting insider, we can see what he's done, and he hasn't sold any at the moment.
Right. What about the rest of you guys? How much? What's the insider ownership there besides
about 27%, I think. Look, I'm one of the smaller shareholders compared to some of them, like Craig Roberts and Sam. Sam's one of the founding members. Doug Kerwin's the big one. We also have quite a well-known guy who probably most people know, Ross Beatty. He's a fairly large shareholder. But it was when they conceived the company, which is before I was, even considered. It was two Tasmanian geologists who put the land package together, spoke to Doug Kerwin. Doug Kerwin then spoke to an individual who lives in Singapore, who had mainly connections in North America. So that's how it all came about with the North American listing. You'd think that the obvious thing is to actually list it down in Australia, but it was more to do with who wanted to get involved at the time. And Antonio, as much as anybody, timing is a really strange thing. I mean, at that time, there was a bit of a fervor around copper, and I don't need to go into the reasons why copper, but everyone says, okay, we've got to find something. So the whole idea was, wow, these guys have got this massive land package, and everybody was getting involved, and it was all North Americans at the time that were getting involved. So it was the Canadians who led the charge, and that's how we ended up getting listed in Vancouver rather than on the ASX.
I'm just happy it's not in London, if I may say. I don't want to. It's not a dig at your home country, but stocks in London tend to do weird stuff at times. No, that's a good point. And you say you're one of the smallest shareholders, and you almost sound apologetic, but you own 1.5% of the company. You came in later. I often see out there people being judged on, too small of a shareholder, but does a CEO need to be like a centimillionaire to be a good CEO or buy half of the company when they enter? No, not necessarily, right? So you own 1.5%. I mean, that's nothing to be ashamed of. So
Absolutely, it's a double-edged sword, all of this, and I'm a bit jaded myself. When I see somebody with a really large shared position, of course, everybody goes, "Well, all of our interests are aligned." But obviously, then with such a large share position, you're sometimes tainted by the way that you make business decisions because you have so much involved that there's an opportunity that you should be going for. But no, think, oh, hell, I don't really want to dilute my position to get involved in this one, and so I think sometimes the decision-making process gets a little bit tainted if you got too much. But you got to have some skin in the game, and it's got to be. You were asked a slightly difficult barbecue question earlier about salaries and all of this bonuses, but that's how you do get compensated as a CEO with an option package or PSU or RSU or whatever. That's how you get positioned in the company. And 1.5% is not huge, but it's not small, but it's enough to make a difference to my life. And that should be the way it is, right? I mean, if you have success. But I've seen some of these companies run where, the CEO has something 20 odd percent of it. You wonder what sort of decisions he's really going to make on behalf of the best interests of all shareholders or himself.
Right. True. Also, what else matters is average cost. I don't know how much. How do you get your shares? By the way, how do you get that 1.5%? Was it options?
Well, some of them is options, and some of it was I got some of the founders' shares. It was basically a signing bonus.
Okay. Yeah.
No,
nice.
And I just changed the bonus into shares. That's all that happened. I mean, for me to go over, look, you get to a certain level, you have to have an incentive to get in, and that's the best way of sometimes incentivizing somebody to join a company.
I like it. Yeah, and you're explaining that well. Thank you for the clarification too. I think those are important things to talk about because oftentimes you open up a presentation, you see one thing, and it's quick to, I could be quick to draw conclusions, and I know a lot of people can as well. So, but in conclusion, why I'm talking about the money in the first place is because you have that 6 million in the bank, which to me means no more capital raises for the foreseeable future. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, based on our current spend rate, that would last us 2 years. And it already depends on, as we mentioned earlier, success. If we have some success, obviously, dimensions change a little bit, and we might be able to raise money at high levels. But no, we have no real urgency to raise any funds at the moment.
Okay. And then there's also an escrow, I believe, on there's still an escrow on the shares, right? How does that work?
Oh, it's escrows over 6, 7, or 9 months with the, if you like, the founding shareholders. So it's just when we're going for the IPO, it's just to give the shareholders who come in some sort of transparency and also some confidence that the people who got in the early ones weren't just going to be blowing out their stock right away. So it's a slow sort of bleed of shares to some of the founding shareholders. I mean, there's the top 4 shareholders own probably something like 4 or 5 own more than 25% of the stock. So if it was held in hands that, as you say, RMK's now gone off the board, and in safe, it's a difficult, if you like, it's a slightly difficult sell for me if a whole bunch of the stock is immediately held in hands that are not within the company. So it's an easier story, and I just think it's a bit fairer, actually, to be honest with you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, what about the rest of it? Do you, I mean, is it mostly retail? Have you? Okay. Where are they based at? I mean, I would assume North America, but North Americans are not, like you mentioned it in Frankfurt on the presentation. Actually, it was kind of funny. You mentioned that some people even think that Tasmania is in Africa because North Americans don't necessarily like or are keen to Australia to begin with.
It's interesting. The people who have got involved, the larger shareholders who are involved, which John Robbins is another one, and I mentioned Craig Roberts, I mentioned Ross Beatty, and all of these people who got in. I mean, they're very smart people. They know exactly where it is. I'm talking more in general when I made that comment about I get up and give a presentation, and then it's not happened to me once. It's happened more than once. Good luck in Africa, and I'm like, wow, did anything get across here? But in general, some people think like that, but the people who are involved as investors here are very well aware of what Tasmania and where it is. So it's a bit of a flippant comment, I guess I made, but it is. Tasmania is not a well-known jurisdiction, and particularly in North America, geography was not a lesson that they learnt, maybe as well as we did when we were at school.
No, yeah, well, so it's not what I meant. I meant mostly like North Americans like investing within North America, or the easiest to them would be South America. It's sort of like what Africa is to us Europeans, I guess.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there is that element to it too. And when I was an analyst, I was an analyst for a while as well. Look, we did have an Australian desk, and it was a difficult sell for Australians, but again, I'll go back to it. These shareholders who got in early are people who are wealthy, who know what they're doing, and eventually the good project will sort of stand on its own 2 feet. And it's my job actually to educate people here about the relative merits of Tasmania. So of course, by doing that, I will be dishing other areas of the world, like the water problems that you have in Chile. The social problems you have in Peru. I mean, it's an easy story for me to tell when you look at other countries in the world have got worse, and the country that you have has stayed the same. You're relatively getting better. So Australia has always been a good place to invest in. And yes, you're right. The average North American investor does not have a good knowledge of Australia, but that's my job, is to get that story across. And it hasn't been a difficult story to tell, to be honest with you. It's just that people are just not familiar with it.
It's interesting, though, that Tasmania, I know the Fraser Institute of Mining is not the best thing to look at, but it's one of the few things that we have to look at for sort of a quick overview of things. And Australia ranks way higher than Tasmania itself. So you mentioned there's infrastructure there. There's mills around your land packages too that have spare capacity, so that's not going to be an issue. There's water, as you mentioned. There's roads. But why do you think it ranks lower? I mean, what's the good, the bad, and the ugly, I guess, of Tasmania?
I haven't looked at that Fraser Institute, so I'm guessing what you're saying is because Tasmania is a state of Australia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It values lower than, say, WA or Queensland or something like that, is what I'm saying. Yeah. Look, one thing I'd have to say, Antonio, so you're grilling me, I'll grill you, is that sometimes you got to look at how many people have actually filled in the forms on that. And they do tell you in the small print, right? And is it statistically significant? I often look at this and I often answer that question with, well, how many people really filled in the form for Vietnam or whatever? And people, I'm in a different, I've kind of got a little bit of experience of this. People tend to really extol about the virtues of somewhere they really like or they really don't like, right? But somewhere in the in-between, which is Tasmania, there won't be a lot of people. There's not a lot of companies down there. So there won't be a lot of people who have filled it in. So statistically, you have to get all of them to say it's a great place to end up getting a higher ranking. It's just skewing the statistics, that's all. So all I'd urge you to do, and I haven't looked at it, so I can't really answer that question with any 100% assurance. I would just say that the people that are there really like being there, but they probably didn't fill in the form.
You have lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? Just looking at what happened there. So there was when you look at the investment attractiveness index of Tasmania, it fluctuates too. So we have 2019, it was 75, relatively high. 2021, 55. So down quite a lot, and it doesn't make too much sense to fluctuate that much. But I mean, maybe something happened, you think. But then the next year, so 2021, it went up to 77, and now it's down to 54. So you're right. You make
so
a
what's
good
that telling you? There's not enough people filling in the form to make it statistically sort of smooth.
Yeah. No, you make a good point. They differentiate between Western Australia because everybody loves Western Australia.
It's one of the best places in the world.
Yeah. But what about I don't know, permitting Indigenous people, something like that you can give me a little bit of an insight?
Yeah. Okay. Permitting is really easy, and I'll give you, for example, the MRT, which is the Mineral Resources Tasmania. There's so few people doing exploration that you have kind of a personal, everybody involved in it. It took us 2 to 3 weeks to get a drill permit recently when we needed to drill an extension from the road that we have. It's a set process, but it's very transparent and it's not onerously long. Your second question was about indigenous people.
Hmm.
There obviously are going to be indigenous claims in the area, but there is not the actual last indigenous person in Tasmania. Unfortunately, died in the late 1800s, if I'm not mistaken. So there's not a huge indigenous population, but there are indigenous claims. But I'm not aware of any on our property.
Hmm. Okay. Well, I guess that's a good beginning. It's pretty rough terrain, though, right? I mean, it's topographically speaking, Tasmania is a mountainous region, I guess. There's
There are parts of it that are mountainous, yeah,
okay,
and some of our properties are. But think of the Highlands of Scotland or something like that. That's what it kind of looks like. It's
really?
not. It's not like a real peaked mountains and all that where the mining areas are. They're kind of rounded hills, but they call them mountains, but they're not real BC type mountains or Alpine type mountains for sure.
No, I was looking at it, and they're like some mountains can go as high as 1,000 meters, and I'm like, okay, great. I'm from Belgium, so to me that's actually high. But I like visiting Switzerland a lot, and then people would laugh with that. It's a hill.
Yeah. Well, everything in life is relative, right? And they go there, and I would say that the thing that gets me about it is the wind. Holy shit. The wind is like horizontal sometimes because it's coming straight from the Antarctic. But the mountains themselves are pretty. I mean, you can climb up to the top of them without, anybody can do it. They're not that high.
You're actually probably closer to the Antarctic than you are to
Yeah.
Northern Australia, aren't you?
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah, how big
Yeah. So,
Australia
so
is. Yeah.
therefore, when they talk of, like we had to have the rig closed down for a couple of days because of the wind. You can imagine, this thing coming off from the Antarctic horizontal and freezing cold and nothing in between, right?
No. Is that an issue because you're doing helicopter supported drilling, I believe, in some spots?
No,
I
you
mean,
only have to. Yeah, no, I'll answer that one very quickly. If you go into a new area in Tasmania that's never been drilled before, the regulations are you have to bring a helicopter in because they don't want you building roads into an area that might never get to, developed. So, which is fair enough, right?
yeah,
But
good
once you've
point.
actually made a discovery and you make a good case for it, you will be permitted to build roads into there, providing there's no significant opposition to it. So it makes sense, but there are a lot of, let's say, forest tracks in all over that in western part because it has been populated since the late 1800s. I mean, part of this area is very famous for its convicts from Britain, and with that they did all this exploration. And for the longest time, if I'm not mistaken, Mount Lyell was the second largest copper mine in the British Empire, after Britannia Mine, which is just north of me here in Vancouver. So it was a huge amount of exploration going on. So you imagine these old trails all over the place. So you'll be allowed to then refurbish one of those old trails. But if you're drilling, even and as we were, only 200 meters off one of these trails, they ask you to put a helicopter in.
Okay. I guess yeah, fair enough, as you said. How come you mentioned that most of the property actually you have three properties, and most of every property has not been explored with any modern type of technologies and drilling. I guess there was some drilling in the 60s and on some spots, but most of it hasn't. Even though Mount Lyell, as you mentioned, IOCG mine there, why? I mean, why didn't anybody swoop in before you did?
I think one of the main things is that if I answer from the big company side, BHP and Rio Tinto, we were always chasing the big carrots, which are either in Congo, Angola, Chile, Peru. Tasmania was always looked upon as like a little bit of, okay, you've got mid-sized mines, you've got Rosebery, you've got Renison, but it was never one of those that was going to be explored that extensively. And the mid-sized companies that went in there, this is how it happens. They took large pieces of land, but then concentrated on the mine itself and did very little exploration around the mine. So one of the properties that we picked up at Skyline was held in a mid-sized company for a very long time. And it's the first question I get asked, well, why was this never drilled before if you're the first people? Well, it was held in a mid-sized company for so long that being from a large company, I know how it works. I mean, your source of currency is the size of your tenement. And therefore, you kind of hold on to it, and it would be very expensive for us to do it as a junior, but for them it's chump change. It's a tax write-off, and that's what's been happening in certain parts of Tasmania.
And that's what you want to do. If I understand correctly, the idea is here to do your own exploration work, which we're going to get into right now, but try and get somebody else to come in, mid-tier, large company, and spend money on exploration for you.
Well, it's one of the approaches that we're going to take, certainly, and I can see it working. I look at this deal that a company called Inflection did. You might want to look that one up. Very interesting. They did a deal with Anglo Gold Ashanti, and they are also a Canadian listed company with assets in Australia. And Anglo Gold Ashanti now have got to spend a certain amount of money on each of their properties in order to earn in. And they have a large land package like us. Business model makes sense. Their stock got a re-rating. So obviously it's one of the angles we look at. But also, for example, if we find a small asset which is mineable, then we'll take a slightly different approach. These big companies are not interested in like a 20 million ton ore body. And it looks like at Alpine, we're drilling something that at the moment we see about that sort of level of possible mine. And of course, BHP would never be in, unless it's 100 million tons plus, 1%, they're not going to even, give you a second chance with something like that. So it's the land package itself which they'd be interested in, not that one asset. So you might be able to parcel that one asset out and say, okay, then you still can look at the rest of the 110 kilometers, but we take this one out. So look, the only thing that a junior company has got is they can move quickly. Having worked for large companies, they're like a big old, oil freighter. It takes a long time to turn around. So when the market changes, they can't change quick enough. But we can, like this thing that we now have with the rare earths. Yeah, we can quickly do an evaluation and get in there and start drilling next year. Now, we didn't even have that on the plan. Now, I can tell you in BHP, there'll be all sorts of discussions at higher levels. I mean, what are we going to do? Now we got this thing. We can make instant decisions. So the point is that we will do horses for courses on what we have. But ostensibly, you're right, Antonio. I'm sort of setting it all up so that somebody could come in. Our database is looking perfect. We've got all of these anomalies going right up to Devonport in the north, right down to the south. And they could say, hey, boss, I can take this whole package here and we can do a massive exploration program. And it would just be a little bit of a tax write-off for it. And they might have an IOCG equivalent size to whatever. I would love to say Olympic Dam, but it's unlikely. Carpentaria or something like that, right? And now we've got rare earths. Obviously, we're in the right. Like if you know anything about Olympic Dam, it's a huge copper mine. It's a huge gold mine. It's got rare earths. It's got a little bit of everything in there.
It's got uranium. I like that part.
Yeah.
No, but Olympic Dam's deep. It's over 1,000 meters. It's huge. That's the thing so when I looked at CopperCorp, I liked everything. And then you start, you kept talking about IOCG, and everything that I could think about was, okay, this is going to be a dilution nightmare if they want to find this IOCG and determine it on their own, because it's just huge and it's really deep. So I prefer the strategy that you're going with here. So
look, that is an outlier, and you know it. I mean, it's like sitting out there. There's the curve of size of deposits, and then there's a couple out there that know. Another one would be Tampakan in Philippines, and there's another one would be in the Yukon. In Alaska, Pebble. But they're very few and far. So it's more likely. Our closest analogy, I think, might be Candelaria in Chile. I mean, it's that type of IOCG. So IOCGs come in many different varieties, characteristics. In fact, that's the characteristic of an IOCG is no two is the same. But it looks like we have more analogies to Candelaria, which is 480 million tons at 1%. This is the style of IOCG that we seem to have in general. Mount Lyell, by the way, is an epithermal porphyry. It's not necessarily strictly an IOCG either. So there's this transition between a porphyry and IOCG, and we're in that transition period. And it's kind of like when I was at school, we didn't even have the IOCG wasn't even taught because we didn't even know what they were. And I think they're still going through the evolution of trying to define different types of IOCG. So, but I would say we're in the upper levels. The highest level is Olympic Dam, but that is, as I said, it's an anomaly. And then you have the lower, so that'd be in the epithermal area, and then the porphyry, and then deeper. And we're somewhere in that transition zone between the highest levels and the deepest levels. And that's Candelaria.
No, it makes sense.
I know I'm going into that a bit, but it's such a esoteric topic, IOCGs. They're kind of like whatever it is, whatever you want, you've got there, you know, whatever mineral product you have. And some have are rare earths, some don't. Like you have an IOCG, and we've got very little G in our IOCG, as you might have noticed. We have cobalt, but we don't have any G.
Well, that's interesting to me. I was going to ask about that.
Yeah.
So how come IOCG but cobalt?
Because it's just another variation of the same theme. I mean, IOCG was a very early term when they were defining what these types of assets were. And those ones that they defined in the early days had gold. They don't necessarily have to have gold.
So it's like an IOC.
Yeah, well, now they're calling them IOAs, iron oxide apatite, which is just a sort of more technical geological term. And that's a sort of broader range. And then within that, you have the different types of deposit. IOCG is just one type of that IOCG. But it's almost like having a general name for everything, but not everything is of that type. You know what I mean?
Yeah, true. Well, what's the largest potential here? You have IMC, Skyline. We're going to be talking about Razorback. I guess that's a newer asset, but you can talk to me about that too. Would you see the highest potential for that type of mineralization?
It's a difficult one. I think around Alpine, we still have, because we have fundamentally a good start and a good basis now for finding more of the same. And we've got a lot of data from that area now. But we just drilled this new one, as you know, at Skyline Dora. Look, visually, and I've said this publicly, it looks pretty exciting. But until we get the results back, the fat lady isn't singing yet. I'm not sure I can say that anymore, can I? But we don't really know what the results are going to be until we get them back. But they visually look spectacular. I don't know. I mean, it's asking a very impossible question to answer, because without having the results, I don't know which direction we're going to go. Whether it's going to go more on exploring on the AMC, or suddenly the Skyline is going to be the new sun that we start chasing.
Did I read that correctly? The Dora were just 3 holes, and it's a total of 750 meters drill program.
Yeah. No, it's 2 holes actually. Well, the weather got in the way, and we couldn't move honestly, the weather got in the way. We had extremely high winds, and we couldn't move the rig between the 2 locations that we wanted. And there was this feeling like, okay, we can push it at the end of the season, but we might not be able to get the rig out again. And the drilling company decided, no, we don't want that situation. So we pulled it out. It's a good opportunity for us to drill what is a very long magnetic anomaly, just to see the surface samples have spectacular grade, up to 40 grams gold in it, and various base metal values. But until you drill it, that's the what they call the truth machine. So we drilled it now, and we saved, what would be there. It's not, as you know, helicopter drilling is the most expensive form of drilling. We saved ourselves quite a bit of money by not going into it and drilling the second hole. But the geology is still going to be there. And in fact, we got a rebate from the government for drilling it, because they encourage exploration. We got $75,000 back for drilling that hole that we did.
Is that just no questions asked? I mean,
no,
probably some questions, but no strings
what they
attached.
want to do, no, they have to go in and make sure that you haven't caused any environmental damage, and that's the qualifier.
Okay, so what else is happening? This deep hole. What else are you going to be focusing on this year? Dora or something else?
No, there's this other one, Jasper. That we have this Jasper. There was a news release out on that one too. It's an old 1930s mine, and there's 2 types of mine there. There's copper, and then there's more a sort of a silver, lead, zinc hue to it. And it really is quite easy to access, which is one of the appeals of it in the early days, because with all of these 20 odd anomalies that we have, obviously you hit the easiest ones first. And it's got some interesting values from. We took 54 rock samples there, and there, we got high grade gold, high grade copper, and base metals from 2 different rock types. Some from the granitoids, and some from what looks like an ultramafic unit. Mm-hmm. There seems to be some mines that are along the contact between the two. Honestly, Antonio, we're still trying to put it together. But of the 54 samples, almost every sample ran. So yeah, we're going to be doing quite a bit of work on that one this year as well. And like as you just alluded to, we'll be doing an evaluation on the Razorback, seeing as that's the extension of the Mount Lyell mine and the rare earth. So that's going to be our focus. Now, bear in mind, right now it's the winter down there, so it's and Razorback and Dora are in kind of the hilly, areas, and it's a little bit unsavory to get into there. So Alpine you can get into all year round, no problem at all. But some of these other areas, we're preserving capital and just going back in there in the summer. But we'll wait until the results of Dora to see if we're going to drill more holes at Dora.
Dora is an interesting one, right? This is sort of from what I could figure out.
It was discovered in the 1850s and never drilled.
Yeah.
Because it was held in a larger company for such a long time that everybody thinks there's something wrong with it. It's like one of those things where there's absolutely everybody. The trenches that they built on the surface were serious trenches. These aren't people like us going in. These were hand drilled with, hit with hammer and chisel, and they're massive. And yet the grades were pretty good. It looked like they were doing some exploration assets and then just walked away from it. It's actually very famous, and in lots of old literature in this part of the world, it's mentioned this location as an area. But in those days, it was way out in the middle of nowhere for them. It was a very difficult place to get to. But for us these days, there's actually a fishing lodge nearby, and things have changed. So it'll be an area that we're going to be doing more work on for sure, because there's about 25 kilometers of strike, and the Dora itself is only 5. So there's other areas along this skyline. Like, I don't know if you're pulling it up in front of you there, but right at the bottom, there's one prospect called Linda, and it's just east of Mount Lyell. And we've actually done some exploration, and it's looking quite promising. So that's going to be another area that we're looking at too. There's also Mount Sedgwick is a very deep magnetic anomaly, never been drilled sufficiently. Been one drill hole, and it never explained it. So there's all these other things that are in that general area that need to be looked at, but it all becomes a priority game at the end of the day. You have 6 million. Okay, if the market starts to pick up, do you raise more money and do exploration over all of them, or do you concentrate on Jasper, where you're getting some numbers and you keep this one in your back pocket? Oh, but by the way, you've got 20 million tons at Alpine. Shouldn't you be working on a deep hole on that? Well, that's going to cost $300,000. So You've just got, that's the job that I have, is to weigh up where to spend the money, depending on what the market conditions are doing and what we'd be looking like a year from now.
Right. I can see, I'm looking at it, as you said, I've pulled it up here, the Skyline project. It's very close to Mount Lyell. The Linda zone is what, 6 kilometer-ish?
Yeah, just Lyell Mine's 6 kilometers west of Linda.
Yeah, exactly. How come? Again, why aren't the people operating Mount Lyell not taking that away from you?
Well, the people that are operating at Mount Lyell, it was an Indian group that still hold it right now. And they basically just focused. I don't know if you know the history of Mount Lyell at all. It was closed down because there was a couple of deaths in the mine. And, and don't quote me on this, I think about the 1980s or something like that. And it's been on care and maintenance ever since then. And it's been a difficult one for the current operators to get up and going again. There are some. It is reported to have a 25-year mine life still, and they're trying to work the tailings at the moment down there. But I think there was the feeling that it was an area that is kind of had its day, and there was very little exploration potential around it at the time for the operators that took it, which was this Indian group, which is now being taken over. There's an option on it by an Australian company. So I don't think there was and answer your question, I don't think it was an impetus to do more exploration. It was to concentrate on what they had.
Okay. Oh, good for you then. So Q3 is Alpine metallurgy test work. So what you have in the presentation, that's still happening?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I just had a discussion with my geologist yesterday. There's 18% Fe in there, and we're quite close to Savage River. So if you had a byproduct, it'd be the first time I've ever seen it listed. Our byproduct would be iron, and we'd send it to the iron mine there. So we need to know whether we can recover this, because it would be quite significant. If we got an average of 0.7% copper in there, which is like right up there with the realms of something in Chile or Peru, but then we have this nice little equivalence of iron, that would be a nice sweetener. But we don't know if it's recoverable or if it's the right type of iron. We still need to do these metallurgical tests, and so that's what that's all about. But these tests are not that cheap. This is the issue. I mean, to do a test like that is about $50,000, and you have to say, okay, and all right, you have to justify the value of getting that result, because it's not a final result, and that's just the start of everything. So, it's going back to it. It's something that a major would do right away, and they wouldn't be dropping 200,000 on doing a metallurgical test.
Okay, and then come Q4, this is when the weather starts turning there. That's their summer, I guess, and you're gonna start doing
regional exploration again.
Words are difficult for me. Okay, regional exploration at Skyline. Okay, what are you doing in the meanwhile? Are you doing any? I don't know.
Well, there's a huge amount of data on this Razorback, so we're trying to pull it all together, see what there is. There's been some drilling by a previous operator called Corona, and we're looking at it. I mean, when you got values of 90, well, I'm just going to look over here. Sorry, 73 meters at 0.5% TREO, and then including 30 meters at 2%. That's significant, and what we don't know how it fits in geologically with what else is on the property. I mean, it looks like there's at least two styles of mineralization on there. There's a northern end that looks a bit more Mount Lyell, and the southern end looks completely different, the Darwin area. So yeah, that's what they're going to be focusing on. And one of the geologists is taking a whole bunch more samples. Like we took 54 samples from Jasper, he's taken a whole bunch more. And we've done all the reevaluation at Alpine. And yes, I mean, ideally we'd like to drill 2 deep holes, but it's a cost-reward situation.
Right. I believe you also wanted to go for the Whiskey Creek project. And that's also rather big. What is it, 240 square kilometers area I've written down. What's the latest on that? Is that going to take 9 months as well?
That one has been applied for, and yeah, it's still going through the local, what do you call it? The local, it's gone to notice board, and the locals can comment on whether they'd like it to be in that general. It's a little bit out of the mining district of all of the mines that are in there. There's a mining area, it's called the Mount Reed Volcanics, that hosts 90% of the mineral deposits there. It's a little bit outside of it, and it's not a high priority for us right now, to be frank. I mean, it's something that came up, and there is some copper on there that's of interest, and it might be sediment hosted copper, but it's not a high priority, and we're not pushing the government in order to acquire it, because of course then it will come with a certain amount of cost. But there is one location on there that looks quite interesting for us, but it's not a high priority.
Yeah, but because that's what I was going to ask. Do you need that? I mean, you have 1,600 square kilometers.
That one location within it is worth the effort, to be frank.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I hope you can update me on that later on in the year. I don't think I have any other questions, though. What do you think I'm missing here? Anything you came here hoping to talk about, but I'm forgetting to ask?
No, you asked some quite interesting questions there. Some that I've never been asked before, so good on you. But
thank you.
But no, I think you covered it, and I think I've spoken enough. Everybody be bored to tears by now.
Thank you so much for investing your time with me, Steve. I'm looking to further discussions.
Okay, thanks, mate. Cheers.